Carrie by Stephen King. Part 1, Bloodsport. Part 2. She walked down Ewan Avenue and crossed over to Carlin at the spotlight on the corner. Her head was down, and she was trying to think of nothing. Cramps came and went in great, gripping waves, making her slow down and speed up like a car with carburetor trouble. She stared at the sidewalk, quartz glittering in the cement, hopscotch grids scratched in ghostly, rain-faded chalk, wads of gum stamped flat, pieces of tinfoil and penny candy wrappers. They all hate, and they never stop. They never get tired of it. A penny lodged in a crack. She kicked it. Imagine Chris Harkinson all bloody and screaming for mercy, with rats crawling all over her face. Good. Good. That would be good. A dog turd with a foot track in the middle of it. A roll of blackened caps that some kid had banged with a stone. Cigarette butts. Crash in her head with a rock, with a boulder. Crash in all of their heads. Good. Good. Savior Jesus, meek and mild. That was good for Mama, all right for her. She didn't have to go among the wolves every day of every year, out into a carnival of laughers, joke-tellers, pointers, snickerers. And didn't Mama say there would be a day of judgment? The name of that star shall be wormwood, and they shall be scourged with scorpions, and an angel with a sword? If only it would be today, and Jesus coming not with a lamb and a shepherd's crook, but with a boulder in each hand to crush the laughers and the snickerers, to root out the evil and destroy it screaming. A terrible Jesus of blood and righteousness. And if only she could be his sword in his arm. She had tried to fit. She had defied Mama in 100 little ways, had tried to erase the red plague circle that had been drawn around her from the first day she had left the controlled environment of the small house on Carlin Street, and had walked up to the Barker Street Grammar School with her Bible under her arm. She could still remember that day, the stairs and the sudden, awful silence when she had gotten down on her knees before lunch in the school cafeteria. The laughter had begun on that day and had echoed up through the years. The red plague circle was like blood itself. You could scrub and scrub and scrub, and still it would be there, not erased, not clean. She had never gotten on her knees in a public place again, although she had not told Mama that. Still, the original memory remained, with her and with them. She had fought Mama tooth and nail over the Christian youth camp, and had earned the money to go herself by taking in sewing. Mama told her darkly that it was sin, that it was Methodists and Baptists and Congregationalists, and that it was sin and backsliding. She forbade Carrie to swim at the camp. Yet, although she had swum and had laughed when they ducked her until she couldn't get her breath anymore and they kept doing it and she got panicky and began to scream, and had tried to take part in the camp's activities, 1,000 practical jokes had been played on old praying Carrie, and she had come home on the bus a week early, her eyes red and socketed from weeping, to be picked up by Mama at the station, and Mama had told her grimly that should treasure the memory of her scourging as proof that Mama knew, that Mama was right, that the only hope of safety and salvation was inside the red circle. For straight is the gate, Mama said grimly in the taxi, and at home she had sent Carrie to the closet for 6 hours. Mama had, of course, forbade her to shower with the other girls. Carrie had hidden her shower things in her school locker and had showered anyway, taking part in a naked ritual that was shameful and embarrassing to her, in hopes that the circle around her might fade a little, just a little. But today, oh today. Tommy Erbter, age 5, was biking up the other side of the street. He was a small, intense-looking boy on a 20-inch Schwinn with bright red training wheels. He was humming Scooby-Doo, Where Are You under his breath. He saw Carrie, brightened, and stuck out his tongue. "Hey, old fart face! "Oh, praying Carrie!" Carrie glared at him with sudden smoking rage. The bike wobbled on its training wheels and suddenly fell over. Tommy screamed. The bike was on top of him. Carrie smiled and walked on. The sound of Tommy's wails was sweet, jangling music in her ears. If only she could make something like that happen whenever she liked. Just did. She stopped, dead, 7 houses up from her own, staring blankly at nothing. Behind her, Tommy was climbing tearfully back onto his bike, nursing a scraped knee. He yelled something at her, but she ignored it. She had been yelled at by experts. She had been thinking, fall off that bike, kid, push you off that bike, and split your rotten head. And something had happened. Her mind had... She groped for a word. Had flexed. That was not just right, but it was very close. There had been a curious mental bending, almost like an elbow curling a dumbbell. That wasn't exactly right either, but it was all she could think of. An elbow with no strength. A weak baby muscle. Flex. She suddenly stared fiercely at Mrs. Yorty's big picture window. She thought, stupid frumpy old bitch, break that window. Nothing. Mrs. Yorty's picture window glittered serenely in the fresh 9 o'clock glow of morning. Another cramp gripped Carrie's belly and she walked on. But the light in the ashtray. Don't forget the ashtray. She looked back. Old bitch hates my mama. Over her shoulder. Again it seemed that something flexed. But very weakly. The flow of her thoughts shuddered as if there had been a sudden bubbling from a wellspring deeper inside. The picture window seemed to ripple. Nothing more. It could have been her eyes. Could have been. Her head began to feel tired and fuzzy, and it throbbed with the beginning of a headache. Her eyes were hot, as if she had just sat down and read the book of Revelation straight through. She continued to walk down the street toward the small white house with the blue shutters. The familiar hate-love-dread feeling was churning inside her. Ivy had crawled up the west side of the bungalow. They always called it the bungalow, because the White House sounded like a political joke, and Mama said all politicians were crooks and sinners, and would eventually give the country over to their godless Reds, who would put all the believers of Jesus, even the Catholics, up against the wall. And the ivy was picturesque. She knew it was, but sometimes she hated it. Sometimes, like now, the ivy looked like a grotesque giant hand ridged with great veins which had sprung up out of the ground to grip the building. She approached it with dragging feet. Of course, there had been the stones. She stopped again, blinking vapidly at the day. The stones. Mama never talked about that. Carrie didn't even know if her mama still remembered the day of the stones. It was surprising that she herself still remembered it. She had been a very little girl then. How old? 3? 4? There had been that girl in the white bathing suit, and then the stones came. And things had flown in the house. Here the memory was, suddenly bright and clear, as if it had been here all along, just below the surface, waiting for a kind of mental puberty. Waiting, maybe, for today. From Carrie, The Black Dawn of TK, Esquire Magazine, September 12, 1980, by Jack Gaver. Estelle Horan has lived in the neat San Diego suburb of Parrish for 12 years, and outwardly, she's typical Miss California. She wears bright print shifts and smoked amber sunglasses. Her hair is black streaked blonde. She drives a neat maroon Volkswagen Formula V with a smile decal on the gas cap and a green flag ecology sticker on the back window. Her husband is an executive at the Parrish branch of the Bank of America. Her son and daughter are certified members of the Southern California Sun and Fun crowd, burnished brown beach creatures. There is a hibachi in the small, beautifully kept backyard, and the door chimes play a tinkly phrase from the refrain of Hey Jude. But Miss Horan still carries the thin, difficult soil of New England somewhere inside her. And when she talks of Carrie White, her face takes on an odd, pinched look that is more like Lovecraft out of Arkham than Kerouac out of Southern Cal. Of course she was strange, Estelle Horan tells me, lighting a second Virginia Slim a moment after stubbing out her first. The whole family was strange. Ralph was a construction worker, and people on the street said he carried a Bible and a .38 revolver to work with him every day. The Bible was for his coffee break and lunch. The .38 was in case he met Antichrist on the job. I can remember the Bible myself. The revolver? Who knows? He was a big, olive-skinned man with his hair always shaved into a flat-top crew cut. He always looked mean, and you didn't meet his eyes. Not ever. They were so intense they actually seemed to glow. When you saw him coming, you crossed the street, and you never stuck out your tongue at his back. Not ever. That's how spooky he was. She pauses, puffing clouds of cigarette smoke toward the pseudo-redwood beams that crossed the ceiling. Stella Horan lived on Carlin Street until she was 20, commuting to day classes at Lewin Business College in Moughton. But she remembers the incident of the stones very clearly. There are times, she says, when I wonder if I might have caused it. Their backyard was next to ours, and Mrs. White had put in a hedge, but it hadn't grown out yet. She called my mother dozens of times about the show I was putting on in my backyard. Well, my bathing suit was perfectly decent, prudish by today's standards. Nothing but a plain old one-piece Jansen. Mrs. White used to go on and on about what a scandal it was for her baby. My mother, well, she tries to be polite, but her temper is so quick. I don't know what Margaret White said to finally push her over the edge. Called me the whore of Babylon, I suppose. But my mother told her our yard was our yard, and I'd go out and dance the hoochie-coochie buck naked if that was her pleasure and mine. She also told her that she was a dirty old woman with a can of worms for a mind. There was a lot more shouting, but that was the upshot of it. I wanted to stop sunbathing right then. I hate trouble. It upsets my stomach. But Mom, when she gets a case, she's a terror. She came home from Jordan Marsh with a little white bikini. Told me I might as well get all the sun I could. After all, she said, the privacy of our own backyard and all. Stella Horan smiles a little at the memory and crushes out her cigarette. I tried to argue with her, tell her I didn't want any more trouble, didn't want to be a pawn in their back fence war. Didn't do a bit of good. Trying to stop my mom when she gets a bee in her hat is like trying to stop a Mack truck going downhill with no brakes. Actually, there was more to it. I was scared of the Whites. Real religious nuts are nothing to fool with. Sure, Ralph White was dead, but what if Margaret still had that .38 around? But there I was on Saturday afternoon, spread out on a blanket in the backyard, covered with suntan lotion, listening to Top 40 on the radio. Mom hated that stuff, and usually she'd yell out at least twice for me to turn it down before she went nuts. But that day she turned it up twice herself. I started to feel like the whore of Babylon myself. But nobody came out of the Whites' place. Not even the old lady to hang her wash. That's something else. She never hung any undies on the back line. Not even Carrie's. And she was only 3 back then. Always in the house. I started to relax. I guess I was thinking Margaret must have taken Carrie to the park to worship God in the raw or something. Anyway, after a little while I rolled on my back, put one arm over my eyes and dozed off. When I woke up, Carrie was standing next to me, looking down at my body. She breaks off, frowning into space. Outside, the cars are whizzing by endlessly. I can hear the steady little whine my tape recorder makes, but it all seems a little too brittle, too glossy. Just a cheap patina over a darker world. A real world where nightmares happen. She was such a pretty girl, Stella Horan resumes, lighting another cigarette. I've seen some high school pictures of her, and that horrible fuzzy black and white photo on the cover of Newsweek. I look at them, and all I can think is, dear God, where did she go? What did that woman do to her? Then I feel sick and sorry. She was so pretty, with pink cheeks and bright brown eyes, and her hair the shade of blonde you know will darken and get mousy. Sweet is the only word that fits. Sweet and bright and innocent. Her mother's sickness hadn't touched her very deeply. Not then. I kind of started up awake and tried to smile. It was hard to think what to do. I was loggy from the sun and my mind felt sticky and slow. I said, "Hi." She was wearing a little yellow dress, sort of cute but awfully long for a little girl in the summer. It came down to her shins. She didn't smile back. She just pointed and said, "What are those?" I looked down and saw that my top had slipped while I was asleep. So I fixed it and said, "Those are my breasts, Carrie." Then she said, very solemnly, "I wish I had some." I said, "You have to wait, Carrie. You won't start to get them for another, 8 or 9 years." "No, I won't," she said. "Mama says good girls don't." She looked half strange for a little girl, half sad and half self-righteous. I could hardly believe it, and the first thing that popped into my mind also popped right out my mouth. I said, "Well, I'm a good girl, and doesn't your mother have breasts?" She lowered her head and said something so softly I couldn't hear it. When I asked her to repeat it, she looked at me defiantly and said that her mama had been bad when she made her, and that was why she had them. She called them dirty pillows, as if it was all one word. I couldn't believe it. I was just dumbfounded. There was nothing at all I could think to say. We just stared at each other, and what I wanted to do was grab that sad little scrap of a girl and run away with her. And that was when Margaret White came out of her back door and saw us. For a minute, she just goggled as if she couldn't believe it. Then she opened her mouth and whooped. The ugliest sound I've ever heard in my life. It was like the noise of a bull alligator would make in a swamp. She just whooped. Rage. Complete, insane rage. Her face went just as red as the side of a fire truck, and she curled her hands into fists and whooped at the sky. She was shaking all over. I thought she was having a stroke. Her face was all scrunched up, and it was a gargoyle's face. I thought Carrie was going to faint or die on the spot. She sucked in all her breath, and that little face went a cottage cheesy color. Her mother yelled, "Carrie!" I jumped up and yelled back, "Don't you yell at her that way. You ought to be ashamed." Something stupid like that. I don't remember. Carrie started to go back, and then she stopped, and then she started again. And just before she crossed over from our lawn to theirs, she looked back at me, and there was a look. Oh, dreadful. I can't say it. Wanting and hating and fearing. And misery. As if life itself had fallen on her like stones, all at the age of 3. My mother came out on the back stoop, and her face just crumpled when she saw the child. And Margaret, oh, she was screaming things about sluts and strumpets and the sins of the fathers being visited even unto the 7th generation. My tongue felt like a little dried-up plant. For just a second, Carrie stood swaying back and forth between the 2 yards. Then Margaret White looked upward, and I swear, sweet Jesus, that woman bayed at the sky. And then she started to hurt herself, scourge herself. She was clawing at her neck and cheeks, making red marks and scratches. She tore her dress. Carrie screamed out, "Mama!" and ran to her. Mrs. White kind of squatted like a frog, and her arms swooped wide open. I thought she was going to crush her, and I screamed. The woman was grinning and drooling right down her chin. I was sick. Jesus, I was so sick. She gathered her up and they went in. I turned off my radio and I could hear her. Some of the words, but not all. You didn't have to hear all the words to know what was going on. Praying and sobbing and screeching. Crazy sounds. And Margaret telling the little girl to get herself into her closet and pray. The little girl crying and screaming that she was sorry. She forgot. Then nothing. And my mother and I just looked at each other. I never saw Mom look so bad, not even when Dad died. She said, "The child." And that was all. We went inside. She gets up and goes to the window, a pretty woman in a yellow no-back sundress. "It's almost like living it all over again, you know," she says, not turning around. "I'm all riled up inside again." She laughs a little and cradles her elbows in her palms. "Oh, she was so pretty. You never know from those pictures." Cars go by outside, back and forth, and I sit and wait for her to go on. She reminds me of a pole vaulter eyeing the bar and wondering if it's set too high. "My mother brewed us Scotch tea, strong, with milk, the way she used to when I was tomboying around and someone would push me in the nettle patch or I'd fall off my bicycle. It was awful, but we drank it anyway, sitting across from each other in the kitchen nook. She was in some old house dress with the hem falling down and back, and I was in my Whore of Babylon two-piece swimsuit. I wanted to cry, but it was too real to cry about, not like the movies. Once when I was in New York, I saw an old drunk leading a little girl in a blue dress by the hand. The girl had cried herself into a bloody nose. The drunk had goiter and his neck looked like an inner tube. There was a red bump in the middle of his forehead and a long white string on the blue serge jacket he was wearing. Everyone kept going and coming because, if you did, then pretty soon you wouldn't see them anymore. That was real too. I wanted to tell my mother that, and I was just opening my mouth to say it when the other thing happened. The thing you want to hear about, I guess. There was a big thump outside that made the glasses rattle the china cabinet. It was a feeling as well as a sound, thick and solid, as if someone had just punched an iron safe off the roof. She lights a new cigarette and begins to puff rapidly. I went to the window and looked out, but I couldn't see anything. Then, when I was getting ready to turn around, something else fell. The sun glittered on it. I thought it was a big glass globe for a second. Then it hit the edge of the Whites' roof and shattered, and it wasn't glass at all. It was a big chunk of ice. I was going to turn around and tell Mom, and that's when they started to fall all at once, in a shower. They were falling on the Whites' roof, on the back and front lawn, on the outside door to their cellar. That was a sheet tin bulkhead, and when the first one hit, it made a huge bong noise, like a church bell. My mother and I both screamed. We were clutching each other like a couple of girls in a thunderstorm. Then it stopped. There was no sound at all from their house. You could see the water from the melting ice trickling down their slate shingles in the sunshine. A great big hunk of ice was stuck in the angle of the roof in their little chimney. The light on it was so bright that my eyes hurt to look at it. My mother started to ask me if it was over, and then Margaret screamed. The sound came to us very clearly. In a way, it was worse than before, because there was terror in this one. Then there was clanging, banging sounds, as if she was throwing every pot and pan in the house at the girl. The back door slammed open and slammed closed. No one came out. More screams. Mom said for me to call the police, but I couldn't move. I was stuck to the spot. Mr. Kirk and his wife, Virginia, came out on their lawn to look. The Smiths, too. Pretty soon everyone on the street that was home had come out. Even old Mrs. Warwick from up the block, and she was deaf in one ear. Things started to crash and tinkle and break. Bottles, glasses, I don't know what all. And then the side window broke open and the kitchen table fell halfway through, with God as my witness. It was a big mahogany thing, and it took the screen with it, and it must have weighed 300 pounds. How could a woman, even a big woman, throw that? I ask her if she is implying something. "I'm only telling you," she insists, suddenly distraught. "I'm not asking you to believe." She seems to catch her breath and then goes on flatly. "There was nothing for maybe 5 minutes. Water was dripping out of the gutters over there, and there was ice all over the Whites' lawn. It was melting fast." She gives a short, chopping laugh and butts her cigarette. "Why not? It was August." She wanders aimlessly back toward the sofa, then veers away. Then the stones, right out of the blue sky. Whistling and screaming like bombs. My mother cried out, "What in the name of God?" and put her hands over her head. But I couldn't move. I watched it all, and I couldn't move. It didn't matter anyway. They only fell on the Whites' property. One of them hit a downspout and knocked it onto the lawn. Others punched holes right through the roof and into the attic. The roof made a big cracking sound each time one hit, and puffs of dust would squirt up. The ones that hit the ground made everything vibrate. You could feel them hitting in your feet. Our china was tinkling and the fancy Welsh dresser was shaking, and Mom's teacup fell onto the floor and broke. They made big pits in the Whites' back lawn when they struck. Craters. Mrs. White hired a junk man from across town to cart them away, and Jerry Smith from up the street paid him $1 to let him chip a piece off one. He took it to BU and they looked at it and said it was ordinary granite. One of the last ones hit a little table they had in their backyard and smashed it to pieces. But nothing that wasn't on their property was hit. She stops and turns from the window to look at me, and her face is haggard from remembering it all that. One hand plays forgetfully with her casually stylish shag haircut. Not much of it got into the local paper. By the time Billy Harris came around, he reported the Chamberlain News. She had already gotten the roof fixed, and when people told him the stones had gone right through it, I think he thought we were all pulling his leg. Nobody wants to believe it, not even now. You and all the people who will read what you write will wish they could laugh it off and call me just another nut who's been out there in the sun too long. But it happened. There were lots of people in the block who saw it happen, and it was just as real as that drunk leading the little girl with the bloody nose. And now there's this other thing. No one can laugh that off either. Too many people are dead. And it's not just on the Whites' property anymore. She smiles, but there's not a drop of humor in it. She says Ralph White was insured, and Margaret got a lot of money when he died. Double indemnity. He left the house insured too, but she never got a penny of that. The damage was caused by an act of God. Poetic justice, huh? She laughs a little, but there's no humor in that either. Found written repeatedly on one page of a Ewan Consolidated High School notebook owned by Carrie White. Everybody's guessed that baby can't be blessed till she finally sees that she's like all the rest. Carrie went into the house and closed the door behind her. Bright daylight disappeared and was replaced by brown shadows, coolness, and the oppressive smell of talcum powder. The only sound was the ticking of the Black Forest cuckoo clock in the living room. Mom had gotten the cuckoo clock with green stamps. Once, in the 6th grade, Carrie had set out to ask Mama if green stamps weren't sinful, but her nerve had failed her. She walked up the hall and put her coat in the closet. A luminous picture above the coat hooks limned a ghostly Jesus hovering grimly over a family seated at a kitchen table. Beneath was the caption, also luminous, "The Unseen Guest." She went into the living room and stood in the middle of the faded, started to be threadbare rug. She closed her eyes and watched the little dots flash by in the darkness. Her headache thumped queasily behind her temples. Alone. Mama worked on the speed ironer and folder down at the Blue Ribbon Laundry in Chamberlain Center. She had worked there since Carrie was 5, when the compensation insurance that had resulted from her father's accident had begun to run out. Her hours were from 7:30 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. The laundry was godless. Mama had told her so many times. The foreman, Mr. Elton Mott, was especially godless. Mama said that Satan had reserved a special blue corner of hell for Elt, as he was called at the Blue Ribbon. Alone. She opened her eyes. The living room contained 2 chairs with straight backs. There was a sewing table with a light where Carrie sometimes made dresses in the evening while Mama tatted doilies and talked about the coming. The Black Forest cuckoo clock was on the far wall. There were many religious pictures, but the one Carrie liked best was on the wall above her chair. It was Jesus leading lambs on a hill that was as green and smooth as the riverside golf course. The others were not as tranquil. Jesus turning the money changers from the temple, Moses throwing the tablets down upon the worshippers of the golden calf, Thomas the doubter putting his hand in Christ's wounded side. Oh, the horrified fascination of that one and the nightmares it had given her as a girl. Noah's ark floating above the agonized, drowning sinners. Lot and his family fleeing the great burning of Sodom and Gomorrah. On a small deal table there was a lamp and a stack of tracts. The top pamphlet showed a sinner. His spiritual status was obvious from the agonized expression on his face, trying to crawl beneath a large boulder. The title blared, "Neither shall the rock hide him on that day." But the room was actually dominated by a huge plaster crucifix on the far wall, fully 4 feet high. Mama had mail-ordered it special from St. Louis. The Jesus impaled upon it was frozen in a grotesque, muscle-straining rictus of pain, mouth drawn down in a groaning curve. His crown of thorns bled scarlet streams down temples and forehead. The eyes were turned up in a medieval expression of slanted agony. Both hands were also drenched with blood, and the feet were nailed to a small plaster platform. This corpus had also given Carrie endless nightmares in which the mutilated Christ chased her through dream corridors, holding a mallet and nails, begging her to take up her cross and follow him. Just lately, these dreams had evolved into something less understandable but more sinister. The object did not seem to be murder, but something even more awful. Alone. The pain in her legs and belly and privates had drained away a little. She no longer thought she was bleeding to death. The word was menstruation, and all at once it seemed logical and inevitable. It was her time of the month. She giggled a strange, affrighted giggle in the solemn stillness of the living room. It sounded like a quiz show. You too could win an all-expenses-paid trip to Bermuda on the time of the month. Like the memory of the stones, the knowledge of menstruation seemed always to have been there, blocked, but waiting. She turned and walked heavily upstairs. The bathroom had a wooden floor that had been scrubbed nearly white. Cleanliness is next to godliness, and a tub on claw feet. Rust stains dripped down the porcelain below the chrome spout, and there was no shower attachment. Mama said showers were sinful. Carrie went in, opened the towel cabinet, and began to hunt purposely but carefully, not leaving anything out of place. Mama's eyes were sharp. The blue box was in the very back, behind the old towels they didn't use anymore. There was a fuzzily silhouetted woman in a long, filmy gown on the side. She took one of the napkins out and looked at it curiously. She had blotted the lipstick that she snuck into her purse quite openly these days, once on a street corner. Now she remembered, or imagined she did, quizzical, shocked looks. Her face flamed. They had told her. The flush faded to a milky anger. She went into her tiny bedroom. There were many more religious pictures here, but there were more lambs and fewer scenes of righteous wrath. A Yuan pendant was tacked over her dresser. On the dresser itself was a Bible and a plastic Jesus that glowed in the dark. She undressed. First her blouse, then her hateful knee-length skirt, her slip, her girdle, her petit pants, her garter belt, her stockings. She looked at the pile of heavy clothes, their buttons and rubber, with an expression of fierce wretchedness. In the school library there was a stack of back issues of 17, and often she leafed through them, pasting an expression of idiotic casualness on her face. The models looked so easy and smooth in their short, kicky shirts, pantyhose, and frilly underwear with patterns on them. Of course, easy was one of Mama's pet words. She knew what Mama would say, oh no question, to describe them. And it would make her dreadfully self-conscious. She knew that. Naked, evil, blackened with the sin of exhibitionism, the breeze blowing lewdly up the backs of her legs, inciting lust. And she knew that they would know how she felt. They always did. They would embarrass her somehow, push her savagely back down the clowndom. It was their way. She knew she could be, What? In another place. She was thicker through the waist only because sometimes she felt so miserable, empty, bored, that the only way to fill that gaping, whistling hole was to eat and eat and eat. But she was not that thick through the middle. Her body chemistry would not allow her to go beyond a certain point. And she thought her legs were actually pretty, almost as pretty as Sue Snell's or Vicky Hanscom's. She could be what, oh what, oh what. She could stop the chocolates and her pimples would go down. They always did. She could fix her hair, buy pantyhose and blue and green tights, make little skirts and dresses from Butterick and Simplicity patterns. The price of a bus ticket, a train ticket. She could be, could be, could be alive. She unsnapped her heavy cotton bra and let it fall. Her breasts were milk white, upright and smooth. The nipples were a light coffee color. She ran her hands over them and a little shiver went through her. Evil. Bad, oh it was. Mama had told her there was something. The something was dangerous, ancient, unutterably evil. It could make you feeble. Watch, Mama said. It comes at night. It will make you think of the evil that goes on in parking lots and roadhouses. But, though this was only 9:20 in the morning, Carrie thought that the something had come to her. She ran her hands over her breasts, dirty pillows. Again, and the skin was cool, but the nipples were hot and hard. And when she tweaked one, it made her feel weak and dissolving. Yes, this was the something. Her underpants were spotted with blood. Suddenly, she felt that she must burst into tears, scream, or rip the something out of her body whole and beating, crush it, kill it. The napkin Miss Desjardins had fixed was already wilting, and she changed it carefully, knowing how bad she was, how bad they were, how she hated them and herself. Only Mama was good. Mama had battled the black man and had vanquished him. Carrie had seen it happen in a dream. Mama had driven him out of the front door with a broom, and the black man had fled up Carlin Street into the night, his cloven feet striking red sparks from the cement. Her mama had torn the something out of herself, and it was pure. Carrie hated her. She caught a glimpse of her own face in the tiny mirror she had hung on the back of the door. A mirror with a cheap green plastic rim, good only for combing a hair by. She hated her face, her dull, stupid, bovine face. The vapid eyes, the red, shiny pimples, the nests of black heads. She hated her face most of all. The reflection was suddenly split by a jagged, silvery crack. The mirror fell on the floor and shattered at her feet, leaving only the plastic ring to stare at her like a blinded eye.